Hey everybody, I hope you had a good day today. I had Commissioner's Court today, all day. No, I'm just kidding. We had Commissioner's Court this morning and it did last till lunchtime. Then after lunch we had a budget meeting that lasted until well into the afternoon. As a matter of fact, I just got home and I kind of wanted to update you while everything's fresh in my mind. I also want to reiterate one of the answers that I answered last night about the 911 center. I found out a little bit more about that today, and we did some discussion about that during our budget session, which is kind of cool. And I learned a little bit more, so my answer will be a little bit better for you today. Also, we talked about our COVID is just getting a little more serious, and I do want to encourage everybody. I know, it's tough. I know everybody likes their freedom, but I do want to encourage you to wear a mask when you're out in public and things like that. We had 40 new cases just over the weekend, 40 in Coryell County, not including the TDJC. That is just out in the public, 40 new cases from Friday to Monday. They're reporting right now 241 active cases. We have 4 deaths in Coryell County at the moment. It's just a very serious thing. Just take it serious and do your part, and I think we'll get through this just fine. But one of the reasons I'm doing these videos is because a lot of you are stuck at home and you can't hear, with the new normal that we're having to do with Zoom and teleconference and things like that. So I thought that I would start updating everyone, and it's worked into a pretty good deal. So one of the things that we did talk about at Commissioner's Court, and a motion was made by Commissioner Matthews, as a matter of fact, is we talked about the Justice Center and the jail. Kind of took me by surprise a little bit, but you got to get creative. And so we needed to nail down, because we're in all these discussions. We've hired an architect, we've hired a jail builder. We're on our way into getting into things. We got 2 committees, one committee working on the Justice Center and one committee working on the jail. And Commissioner Matthews just kind of wanted to nail down where we are and what we need to do. And so his suggestion was, we can't afford what the architect has designed for us. It's just going to be way out of our budget. And what the architect would like to see is the jail built out on FM 929, out by the Woodman unit, just right next door to the Woodman unit. He would like to see the jail built, 240 beds with being able to add an additional 260 beds. So it'd make a 500 bed total. Is that right? Yeah, 500 bed total. So what they would do is build 240 beds, build a kitchen that would sustain 500 beds, and a washateria, the laundry room that would sustain 500 beds and so on. And we can right now build 240 beds. That would bring all of our inmates back in from outside of other counties, and then we wouldn't have to be paying so much out of the counties. So Commissioner Matthews made the motion for that, and also to build the Justice Center and house a certain the architect wanted us to house DPS and a bunch of the game warden, Texas, the special rangers and DPS and all kinds of things out at the new jail site. It's just not feasible for us to do that at this time. The money would just be too much for our county to handle at one time, and too much for our budget to handle. So the thought was, and it's a good thought, is that we build the 240 beds out there next to the Woodman unit off of FM 929, and we hold off on building the office area. We just build the 240 beds and everything that will sustain the 240 beds, and the laundry, the kitchen, the Sally Port where you bring them in, the offices for the jailers, and all of that. Get all of that built, and then later on we can build onto that the sheriff's office and the other supporting entities that need to go out there. The reason being is that can be built cheaper. You got 2 builders on the Commissioner's Court. I'm one of them, and Commissioner Matthews is one of them. And we kind of know what we're looking at and kind of know prices and things like that. And we know that we could, a jail builder's price is a lot higher than a regular old contractor price. So later on, we can go and maybe put in the offices and things like that. But at the current time, we can keep the sheriff where he's at the sheriff's department. And then they want to build a justice center, which this brought up the controversy. They want to build a justice center on the Foxworth property across from where the DPS is housed right now. And that's okay with me. But so Commissioner Matthews made the motion and it was approved. The whole court voted for both of those items for the architect to look at and give us a price on. So it was voted to be approved. It wasn't voted. There was nothing said about the Justice Center being built first. It wasn't until later on in budget discussions that somebody brought that up. And by no means, and I want no one to misunderstand this, that I do not feel like the Justice Center needs to be built first. I feel like the jail needs to be built first, and we should have started it years ago, period. Okay, so I don't want any misunderstandings there. But that was brought up today. There was, since they mentioned the Justice Center first, everybody was thinking, oh gosh, they're going to build the Justice Center and just the Justice Center. But I can promise you, I will not vote for that. So that I've always stood that way. I always will. But anyway, I can beat that horse to death. It's starting to stink. But anyway, so we talked a little bit about what we're going to do in the budget. And I'll go ahead and go into that. I just want to mention one thing about the budget before I start answering the questions, because I probably already, the 911. The 911 center that I was asked about. And I told you, we didn't have much interest, but here's the deal. Coppers Cove has a PSAP, and so does Gatesville. And PSAP is a public safety answering point, okay? In other words, the city of the Gatesville Police Department is the PSAP for Gatesville, and the Coppers Cove Police Department is the PSAP for Coppers Cove. And then you got the Sheriff's Department. Now, all three have dispatch, okay? Now, the dispatch answers all the calls. Now, depending on where you're calling from, when you dial 911, it takes you to the nearest PSAP, okay? So, in other words, if you live in, down 84 in Arnett, you're going to call 911 from Arnett, you're going to get Gatesville PD. Gatesville PD is then going to transfer you over to the sheriff's office, to their dispatch, okay? There's a little hitch right there that nobody likes, because you're going to call 911, you're going to get one of the two PSAPs if you're in Cordell County. Then if you're outside of those city limits, then they have to switch you over to the sheriff's department. Now, the sheriff's department cannot relinquish their dispatch, because their dispatch, the sheriff's department is the jail. We hold all of the prisoners, and all of the investigations that happen, they use those phone calls. They use the dispatch phone calls. They use the phone calls that are made from the inmate's family sometimes during their investigations. So, they can't let those go. And so a combination PSAP is almost not feasible, just logistically. It is offered, and it's still on the table to be talked about and things like that. And, nobody, it's kind of a power thing too. Nobody wants to relinquish that, because somebody has to oversee it. Some entity has to oversee it. Nobody wants to relinquish their oversight to that. So you can see where that's going. It works very fine the way it is, especially in today's technology. It goes pretty fast. I mean, if you call 911 and you happen to get Gatesville PD, you're going to be immediately switched over to the sheriff's department if you're outside the city limits, and it just happened that fast. So I think we're in pretty good shape as far as that goes. But, I would like to see, I think it'd be more efficient if we did have one central PSAP. But, anyway, that's where we're at on that, and it's still got a lot of talking to do, and again, beating a dead horse. That one's not stinking yet, but But anyway, so that's about all that we talked about. There's a lot of other, minor things, but that's about all. Then we worked our way into the budget, and our budget session was pretty crazy. I told you a little bit about what the motion that Kyle made. Well, we went on to talk more about it during the budget session and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And I brought up a time or two, look, you know, this motion was for both the jail and the Justice Center, and, you know, for us to look into. And it's just to look into. The planning is still going on. The phases are still happening. You know, the architect is hired. The construction manager is hired. We're just trying to figure out the wheres and whys. There is a question that I'll answer here in just a minute from someone about why. So I'll just move on. So we talked about the tax rate. Okay. And there's another question about the tax rate in here, but I just kind of wanted to kind of give you an idea where we're heading with this. It's bad times. COVID, you know, has caused a lot of people to miss work. Incomes are down. Things like that. We're not going to have as much taxes come in, you know, just simply from the different entities, sales tax and what have you. So what we're shooting for this year, whether we'll hit it or not, I don't know, but we're shooting for a no new tax rate. Okay, and what that means is whatever we charged last year to bring in the income that we brought in last year, we're going to charge a tax rate that will bring in the exact same income as we brought in last year. So we're going to work off the same budget that we had last year. So what that means is, you know, since you do have increases in things, you know, everybody's working on their budget to kind of cut it back and curtail it enough that we can match last year's tax income. So I can almost assure you, but I can't promise you just yet, that you probably won't have a tax increase this year. We really would be cool if we had a little decrease, but, you know, hey, give us a minute and let us see what we can do. Okay, and I say that lightly, but I'm very serious. We're working very hard. I mean, we're pinching, you know, if it's $500, we're seeing if we need it or not. I mean, it's that close, you know, on things that we do. So anyway, that was part of the budget workshop that we talked about, and we moved on and talked about the Justice. I think I already told you about the Justice Center and who they want to house in the Justice Center is the DPS, the game warden, possible 911 center, special investigators, county attorney, JPs 3 and 4, CPS and Attorney General Court, 2 courtrooms, constables 3 and 4, emergency management, emergency operations center, and a special ranger's office, and a multi-purpose room for, you know, multi-purpose stuff, you know, commissioner's court, things like that. Then we talked about, I have a new friend that I met that he's mentioned this a time or two. We talked about possibly selling the building that we're in because we just paid for it and it's worth quite a bit, and we could take some of that money and put towards the new jail and Justice Center, things like that. So anyway, We'll move on, and I'm going to go ahead and answer questions now. And I'm going to do this off the cuff, guys. I'm going to go right to my phone. They told me, I just had a second to look through here and see what all questions, and I'm just going to start with the number one person and just move on from there. I'm not going to mention any names, but I am going to read the question, and then I'm going to try to answer it to the best of my ability. Please be patient with me. You know, I got to take a lot of notes and things like that when I'm in court, so... but these are going to be off the cuff. So, all right, here's the first question. First, as someone who lives in your precinct, I am so thankful that you support the local LEOs and the building of the much needed jail. I also appreciate your videos to show transparency and availability to those of us with questions. Maybe you can convince Mr. Miller to do the same. I understand, so hopefully you can explain. I don't understand, so hopefully you can explain to me how a wanted Justice Center is even up for debate to be built prior to a needed jail. I, along with many others, have spent countless hours driving to other counties to interview individuals who are having to be housed out of the county due to the inadequate jail space. I'm quite sure Mr. Miller has never had to drive out of the county in order to complete his daily duties due to inadequate office space. Also, why is that we had to vote for a jail, but apparently no vote is needed for a justice center. Well, there's several reasons, but one is simply financing. The Justice Center, they're thinking it's only going to be about 6,000 square feet. It's only going to cost $1 million to $1.5 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but in big government, it's not. But $1 million to $1.5 million for the Justice Center. A jail with all the facilities is about, well, the one we're looking at was about $26 million. So that's a big difference in price. And they're thinking they could build the small amount first and quicker and that sort of thing. But I don't agree. I absolutely do not agree. I still think that, I don't care if we build them both at the same time. I'm good with that. If they want to do that, that's fine. But we need to start building the jail. We're going to have to finance it. We're going to, there's just no doubt. Our county is not rich. The biggest scare, I think, for the whole court is none of us have ever done anything like this. Not one of us, including our big rich dudes like our county attorney. He's going to get mad at me for saying that. But, we've not done anything to this large extent. I'm not scared of it. I've worked on large construction sites, and things like that. So I'm not worried about it. I know how it's going to go. These guys don't. And it's very scary to think that you're spending, you guys, you folks out there's money. $26 million, or what have you, depending on what we choose to do. It's just not an easy thing to do. So the decision is very hard. And then you get, you're worried if you're making the right decisions and all of that. But at some point, we have to pull the trigger. And at some point, we have to do this. We're losing money. And I'll explain that in another question that I read that's on down the line. But I hope that explains why. But by no means think that I think that the Justice Center should be built first. It's a much needed jail. It's been needed for a long time. And then you asked about voting. Why did you have to vote? You actually didn't have to vote. Here's the funny thing about the whole deal from even back in those days. I've read up on this extensively. You did not have to vote for that. It is an option that the commissioners have to bring it to the people to see what the people want to do. So the court at the time brought it to the people to see if they would vote for the bond. That, some people say they thought that they wouldn't, so then we could just move on with it, but they did. And then it was in their laps, and they didn't follow through with it. They decided at the time, because back in those days, in 2011, I think the outgo for housing prisoners outside the county was only 200,000 or 300,000, at the time. So it wasn't a lot of money to house outside of the county at that time. But I always give Commissioner Jack Wall kudos, because Jack Wall had enough vision back then to say, guys, we're only going to grow. We're only going to get bigger, and the bigger we get, the more criminals we have, the more arrests we're going to make, so it's only going to grow. So why don't we do this now? And that's where the vision came from. It was never brought to fruition because they could never justify the amount of money, because the note on the jail, even at $18.6 million, I think the note on the jail then was like $900,000 a year. Well, they were only spending $200,000 or $300,000 a year housing prisoners. So you can see the math, okay? But as the years go on, even 4 or 5 years ago when I ran for commissioner, it was only at $600,000 or $700,000 a year spending outside the county. But I could see it. Jack Wall explained it to me, and I believed him, and I understood it. He was like, look, it was $200,000 in 2011. Now it's 2015, and it's $600,000. What do you think's going to happen? And I'm like, we got to build a jail. I mean, that's where I got started and on the bandwagon. And so I asked, why aren't we building a jail? Well, we're not reached that point yet. Well, I know it takes a couple of years to build something like that. So I'm like, well, in 2 years, we should have one ready to go, Again, it's kind of scary. So it is what it is, and we are where we are. We can't undo what previous administrations have done. We just can't do it. But what we can do is go from this point on and do the best that we can. And the best that we can do is to start, my personal opinion, building a jail right now and build a justice center. We do need to get the JPs out of their old building. It's not like it's not needed. It is needed. It's just that it's not as needed at the moment as a jail is. So, but there's your differences though. The jail, big money. Justice Center, not so much. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next question. Oh, I lost my place. Give me just a second. I really have lost my place. Okay, here we go. All right. With the COVID-19 affecting many people to earn their full income, and we know tax collections will be down, I would like you to respond to these questions. Does the court know the amount or percentage of tax dollar shortfall anticipated for next year's budget? I kind of just explained that. And I know the guy that asked this question will appreciate that we're going to try our very best not to raise the taxes at all. That hasn't been done as far as I know, and as far as I know. So, but I know that this guy, I wished I could say his name so bad, but I know that this guy would appreciate it. He fights hard for our citizens. If so, will the budget be reduced by this amount? Yes, it will. Will the budget be reduced by this amount, or will the tax rate be increased to make up the difference? Well, the tax rate's kind of funny because we're going to try to stick with no new revenue. So the tax rate won't be the same as last year. It might be up or it might be down just a little bit, depending on the revenue that we bring in. But whatever revenue we brought in last year, we're going to try to bring in the same this year. We're going to keep our at a zero raise, if that makes sense. It's so hard to explain, but you know, we may have more money coming in, or we may have more value, but so we could decrease the tax rate a little bit, which would be kind of cool, you know. But it's going to be the same revenue as we brought in from last year. Okay. The next question is, has any of the commissioners talked to the folks in the counties where our $1 million+ tax dollars are spent to house our jail overflow and what they use the dollars for? If not, maybe all of you should, and then think about what we could be doing for our folks, so maybe some of them wouldn't have to work 2 jobs to pay their bills. Sadly, most folks don't realize how much it costs us, the taxpayers, to have our overflow housed, not only in our county, but in most. And that is right. Our county's not the only one that suffers from overcrowded jail. There's many counties that do, and they have to pay larger jails to house their prisoners. It's just, that's kind of the business that is happening right now. And I personally want to take advantage of that. That's the reason I'm shooting for, we only house about 150 prisoners right now, and I'm shooting for at least 240 beds because we can house prisoners in charge. And not that we're going to make a lot of money off of that, because the more prisoners you have, the more employees you have to have. But we could benefit our employees a little better if we could do that. Now, the money that we're saving is not as much as what people think. That's the catch-22 to this whole thing. Yeah, we're spending $1.1 million right now housing prisoners outside of our county. But the note on a jail of a large size right now that we're trying to do is going to be about 1.2 or 1.3 million. So we're actually going to be spending more, but we will own the jail. Okay, and there's ways to make up the revenue by housing inmates from outside the county. We have other ideas since we're next to the prisons out there of doing some things with the prisons that we can pre-register people who've been sentenced to go to prison. We can bring them in and charge the other counties to house them there, and then move them on into the prison system and things like that. There's just a ton of different things that we're working on, and we're working really hard. I don't know. I'm hoping I'm not speaking so much that things I'm not supposed to be talking about, But anyway, I like to be very, very transparent. So, how much money? Okay, here. I think I've already answered this, but how much money is it costing us a month to house these inmates in other counties? It's right now $1.1 million a year. So you imagine that check per month. I mean, you'll have to divide that by 12. It's quite a bit. Now, here's some questions that I'm not at liberty by law to answer, but I will answer the best that I can. Is how much did the building cost that partly houses our great state troopers? And will you admit, like Commissioner Darren Moore did, that the money came from the special account that was supposed to be used for the new jail? That was before my time, as everybody everybody understands. I really don't know how to answer this. The money that was spent, I can tell you, was not nowhere near what people have put out, if that makes sense. And did it come from a fund that was put aside for the jail? I think the fund that was put aside for the jail, they called it, there's a name for that fund, but there was nothing that regulated that fund to be meant for the jail. So over time, the commissioners used it to purchase some property that they thought that maybe that's where they were going to put the jail. So they thought at the time they were using it, for the jail, so to speak. We wound up using the property to house our DPS, which is fine. And so the next question is, how much did the other buildings cost? I'm not allowed to disclose what any government entity pays for property because it could be used against us. That's the only way I know how to explain this. And it's against the law for me, basically, to say things like that. So I can't. But how much did the other buildings cost? There's no really real other buildings. We bought, or I say I haven't purchased any buildings, but the previous courts did, to house our county attorney and to house our juvenile probation, and they actually bought a building next door to the DA so that they could tear it down and make a parking lot. I mean, they've done things like that, but it's been nothing but improvements. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Will you admit that if you vote to build the Justice Center first, that the money of $1.1 million plus will come from the special account that was set up to be used for the new jail only? No, I won't admit to that, because that will not happen. Because what's going to happen is as I talked about earlier, and I don't know if I got to finish that it wasn't necessary for the commissioners to go out and have a vote for the bond. If we want to build a jail right now, the 4 commissioners have the authority in Coryell County to get a bond. And so what we're going to do for both centers is get one bond for both centers to build. And the bond from 2011 is no longer. It was an $18.6 million bond. We're way past that. We're way on past that. We're probably looking at more 26, 27 million that we're going to have to spend on the 2 buildings. Okay, so what the commissioners will do is go out for a 26 or $7 million bond to cover everything at one time: architects, the builders, the whole 9 yards. So it's a matter of what gets done first is all that's on the table right now. All of this is old and in the past, and there's really no need to bring it up anymore. We've got to move forward. We've got the 2 buildings to build. We got to figure out how to do it. Just that simple. Okay. I'm glad that you admitted that the plans we did as 2 committees would have housed any and all LEOs, courts, Justice Center, and everything else that is connected to prisoners in the county. Inmates is what you should call in the county. I don't understand that question. Is it part of the court's plan to let the $18.5 million bond expire? It is not part of the court's plan at all. As a matter of fact, it's not even discussed anymore. That 2 years ago was discussed that it wouldn't be enough and it wouldn't work anyway. We have hired financial advisors to help us out, and they have advised us to do the new bond and do it all at once. We can get a lower interest rate than what they could have gotten way back then, believe it or not. Matter of fact, now's the time. The pickings are good right now, so that's what we're going to go for. Please admit to everyone that when you bought these buildings, I didn't buy these buildings, first of all, but when you bought these buildings, and there's only one building, please admit to everyone that when you bought these buildings with taxpayer dollars, you had no idea what you were going to do with them. That is all for now. I don't know. I didn't buy them. That was before my time. I don't know. I believe that they planned to build the jail when they bought that building. I mean, that's just, it is what it is. Not all of our plans always work out. So, it just so happened that theirs didn't. But, that I'm not going to let that deter me. Or is that the word? Deter me? Detour me? I'm not going to let that bother me. We are going to move forward, and we're going to get these buildings built. We're going to get the sheriff what he needs. We're going to get our law enforcement. We work very hard to get our law enforcement everything they need. You can ask them. You want to go and ask them, you can. I think that's all. I think that's all the questions that I have that are on here. I can't think of much else to say. I hope I covered a lot for you today. I hope I didn't say anything I wasn't supposed to. And guys, we got another budget meeting. I hope it doesn't last all damn day tomorrow, but if it does, it does. We work for you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a holler anytime. Thank you. Have a good day.